Hi quilters, this is Sarah from Snugglebug Stitching, and today we're having a look at the back of my Sew Diamond quilt at this seemingly seamless backing. But when we zoom in, you can see that it's actually not seamless. I just aligned those prints so that the seam is less noticeable. And honestly, this is not something that I do that much, because if it's a more subtle print or a smaller scale print, it's not something I'm going to worry about for these. But for these super cute sewing machines, and this quilt got to be on display at Bernina University in June, so I was on my best behavior with this one. But for these super cute sewing machines, I decided to match them up. So today we're going to use another quilt for a pattern that I've got coming out soon to show you how to align those prints. So we have our fabric laid out side by side on the ironing board, and you can see if I match up those two edges that I cut, the designs on the prints would not even remotely line up. So I'm going to show you how to match those up. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that the fabric is facing in the same direction. And most of the time you can tell by the print, but if you can't tell by the print, the thing you need to look at is the selvages. So we're looking here, we have this side, we have the selvage with the words on it, and on this side we have the selvage that doesn't have the words on it. So if you have those two touching, then your fabric is going to be facing in the same direction. So what we'll do to match these up is we will take one side and flip it under by about 2 inches and do a hard crease. Let's peel this back. And we'll just flip this over a couple inches and get that nice and straight. And then you're going to press so that you have a hard crease right here. And you want to make sure that you press that so it's a really obvious crease, because you'll need to be able to see that to use it as a guideline when you go to sew your fabric together. Okay, so I've got this pressed, about flipped under by about a couple inches and pressed. You see we still got the selvages on there. That's not a big deal. Those are going to get removed in a later step when we clean that up. But you're going to overlap your fabric enough so that you have those designs matching up. So get those pieces of the dragonflies, which is what I'm looking at to make sure I have it matched up, aligned. It does not have to be perfect, but this is going to be lined up much better than if you did not do this. And we're going to use this glue stick. This is a gigantic glue stick, but you're looking for washable glue sticks here. And I've also used Elmer's school glue, the purple stuff. I've used the Target's knockoff of Elmer's purple glue. So whatever glue you have. Then we're going to glue this side and then match those pieces up and press. So I've got my glue applied and I've got these kind of pressed together. And I actually like to start in the middle, somewhere in the middle, and work my way out on these when I match these up. But now that I've got it glued, pressed down, I grab my iron and heat set that, and you can use steam or not, you know, whatever you want to do. And we'll just go all the way down the length of that place where the seam will be, and continue to glue and press, glue and press. So once you have those seams lined up, when you turn it over to the other side, you'll see this part where we glued this together, and you'll see the crease where we ironed that hard crease, and you're just going to go to your sewing machine and sew right there, right along where you see that crease. And then once that's done, you'll cut about a ½ inch seam allowance to the other side. Now, if you look here and see how far we had to overlap to get that matched up, and if you see how much of a difference there is with those lines not meeting up, that just shows how much extra fabric you use to try to match those prints up. So how much extra you have to use is going to depend on the scale of the prints and basically how far the design goes before it repeats itself. So with this one, I'm using a good bit extra from what I usually do. Like I said, how much extra you have to use is going to depend on the print and how big it is, how far it is before the design repeats itself. But I would probably plan on an extra half yard in both directions just to be sure that you have enough. And if you have more than you need, you can always add to your fabric stash. But just to show you how much extra you're using, basically how much more waste you're going to have. And then I'll get this sewn together. So we're just going to sew right along that crease line. I'll get this sewn together and basted and show you how it turned out. Okay, so I'm at my sewing machine. I've got my 2 pieces of fabric, 2 pieces of backing fabric that we glued together in that spot. They're basically placed right sides together like always. And we're just going to sew down this obvious crease line that we made when we made that hard crease. It's okay to go slow so that you can see what you're doing. So I'm just going to sew all the way down the length of the fabric, and then I'll show you how it turned out. So just a little tip as you're sewing along this crease, just kind of as you go, sort of feel here, smooth that out to be sure you don't have anything bunched up in underneath there, because having to pick those stitches out and doing it again will not be fun. Okay, so there's that seam. Looks pretty good. There are a few places where it's not perfect, but that looks really good. And it's not something that, looking at the whole backing once you get it quilted, it's going to look really nice and the seam will be really hard to see. So now that we have that sewn together, we're going to flip it over and let me find our spot. So we're going to start cutting away this excess, and we'll cut about a 1/2 inch all the way, 1/2 inch seam allowance to the outside, all the way along the length of that seam. Now just a little tip, since this does use a lot more fabric and it's easy to not buy enough, I would recommend before you cut away at the fabric, lay that backing out and lay your quilt top on top of it to be sure that you have enough overhang for when you go to baste this. All right, guys, now that that's basted, just check this out, how uneven the edges are here. And that's because we had to line these designs up. So if yours end up uneven, you didn't do anything wrong. That's just what it does. I'm just going to quilt this myself on a domestic machine, so I'm not going to square that right now. I'm going to quilt it and then just trim it off when I trim everything, when I trim the quilt, like trim off the excess batting. But, if you're going to send this to a long armor, you probably want to square that up a little bit before you send it off.